This is Stefan Schmidt for InsiderIowa.com. We just had an election. It was a kind of bye-bye election. By that I mean it was an off-year election, filling various seats and passing initiatives all over the country. What did we learn from the results of this election? One of the things we learned is that the voters in many parts of the country were not happy with the extreme conservative policies that had been pushed onto their agenda. And I think you can conclude that it was a pretty serious setback for the harshest conservative Republican initiatives, and that happened in several states. For example, in Ohio, the voters rejected a law that was passed by Republican Governor Kasich, which restricted the collective bargaining power of public employees, required them to pay larger co-payments for their health care and so on. And the voters rejected that law by an overwhelming majority. It actually apparently surprised and stunned Governor Kasich. And he said, well, we'll go back and take a look at this again. Maybe we went too far. Clearly the voters thought so. In Mississippi, there was a constitutional amendment initiative on the ballot that would have banned all abortions and most birth control means, and would have made killing an embryo basically a criminal offense. It would be murder. The law would define birth as occurring at the moment when the egg is fertilized. That would be a very unusual definition of life for a lot of people. And the voters, even in conservative Mississippi, which is the most conservative state in the country by some standards, the voters said, no, we don't want to go there. We don't want to put something like that into law. So that was a surprise. On another issue, which was kind of voter rights, the Republicans in Maine, in the state of Maine, had passed a law that would require you to register to vote before an election. In the past, in Maine, as in many states, they had same-day registration. So if you suddenly realized you'd forgotten to register to vote, or you just moved to Maine, or you're somehow hadn't gotten around to it, you would now have to register before election day, which would limit to some extent voting for some people. The Democrats were opposed to that law and campaigned pretty heavily to repeal it. And in fact, the voters in Maine said no. They said no to the law and said, we want same-day voter registration. So that was a setback for Republicans as well. In Iowa, there was an election to fill an empty seat for the Iowa Senate that had been vacated when a Democratic senator joined Governor Branstad's administration, and that seat was up for grabs. It was the most expensive election for a state house seat in the history of Iowa. $1 million was spent on that race, and the Democrat won. So the Democrats retained control of a slim majority in the Iowa Senate, and that was considered to be a significant test of whether the Republican policies, especially on gay marriage and homosexual rights and other things, were popular or not. Because if the Republicans had gained control of the Senate, they would have begun a constitutional amendment to ban gay marriage in Iowa, which the Democrats said shouldn't be done. So that was another defeat for Republicans. So all in all, I've read almost every analysis that's been done and looked at the results around the country. Extremely conservative candidates or issues lost this year in this particular election. And that could be significant in 2012, because if voters are essentially stepping back away from the Tea Party and its very conservative positions on issues, it could mean that the power of the Tea Party is diminishing, that more moderate Republicans maybe have a better chance, and maybe the Democrats will recover some from the drubbing that they got in 2010. So An interesting, very interesting election, and we're going to watch the results very carefully to see what the implications are for President Obama and the Democrats in the actual general election in 2012. I think it's going to be much more interesting than many people had thought, much more competitive, and worth watching and following. And you can follow it right here at InsiderIowa.com. This is Stefan Schmidt. Thank you.